Hi, I'm John and this is Foxlow Academy. Becoming a professional photographer literally changed my life. In today's video, I'm going to talk about 10 things I wish I'd known when starting out as a photographer. Number one is that no one's going to make you a photographer. You can go to college, you can go to university, you can learn about photography and you'll probably learn a lot of really useful information and techniques, but it's not like being a doctor or a lawyer. It's not something where there's a clear path. Now, there's probably doctors and lawyers watching this saying you have no idea how hard it is to become a doctor or a lawyer, and I understand that, I totally get that. But my point is that with a doctor, there's a clear path of progress, and at the end of that, you are a doctor. Whereas that's not the case with photography. Point number two is that it takes a lot of time to get good. There's going to be a lot of practice, a lot of education, a lot of trial and error, a lot of feedback for you to improve your photography to a level where you're able to sell your photos. Number three is that you might not end up photographing what you think you're going to. So this is why it's really important to learn the fundamentals, know exactly how your camera works, know how to use it on manual, know what all the different settings do. Because you might be really into nature and wildlife photography, for example, but your personality might lend itself more to photographing people. That's what happened with me to some extent. I really liked landscape and nature photography, but I'm not an early morning person and that's kind of required to be good at those things. Whereas I am better at working with people, making people feel comfortable and confident during their photo shoot. So I didn't necessarily set out to become a boudoir photographer, but that is what I ended up discovering as my passion and my kind of area of expertise. Number four is that you need to take criticism on board, especially constructive feedback. However, not all feedback and criticism is created equally. So make sure that you do take criticism and take it on board from people whose opinions you respect, people who are teaching or mentoring you. Some people just aren't your clients. They aren't connected with your style of photography. But that doesn't mean that the photography was bad. It just means it's not to their taste. And everyone has different tastes and that's fine. There's a photographer for everyone and there's clients for every photographer. I'll give you an example of something that happened to me early on in my career. This was 10 years ago, maybe even a little longer than that. But I went to photograph an event for a very prominent MP. You all will have heard of him, if you're in the UK anyway. And I did the shoot and I delivered the photos and he didn't like the pictures. The reason that he didn't like the pictures, the feedback that I was given, is that the backgrounds were blurry. Now, this is my style of photography. I shoot with a very shallow depth of field so that my subject or point of interest is very in focus and everything else falls off out of focus in the background. But to this older, very conservative man, he didn't understand why the photos weren't in focus all the way through. So he was not my client. He hadn't booked me because he'd seen my work, connected with it and loved the style of photography I produced. He booked me because he was looking for a photographer. He found a photographer that happened to be me and he booked me. An element of blame has to be placed on myself in that, in the way that I was positioning and marketing myself. I wasn't trying to attract clients who loved what I did and my work. I was just listed somewhere. It was something for me to take on board moving forward, and it's something worth bearing in mind. Number five is that successful photography is usually created by understanding techniques. So there's certain rules to photography in general that are good to know and to understand. Things such as the rule of thirds, which talks about where to position your subject within the frame of a photo. Leading lines, kind of leading your viewer's eye to where you want them to go. These kind of things are rules that are really important. They will improve your photography. They're definitely worth learning. And sometimes, once you understand them, you might want to break those rules for artistic effect. A good example of this is Picasso, obviously a very famous painter, very famous for his abstract work. I'm not a big art or painting guy, so I'm not sure exactly what the correct term is, but his paintings were certainly very abstract. However, Picasso was classically trained. His early work was very realistic paintings of people. He then went on to kind of break all the rules of traditional conservative painting to create these crazy masterpieces that people love and still talk about. So Picasso is a very good example of someone who had all the fundamentals down before he just decided to break the rules, and that was what made him successful. Point number six is that editing is a very different skill to photography. but it's also very important, and the two are very interlinked. No one's going to be as good at both, well, maybe some people are, but most people won't be as good at editing as they are photography, or vice versa. But you need to have the fundamentals. Obviously you need to take good photos, and you need to have the fundamentals of editing as well. Now, editing is something that can be outsourced, but you still need to know the look that you want to be able to describe it to someone else. I personally don't outsource editing. I'm not someone who goes very heavy in Photoshop or does like extreme edits, but I do know how I want my photos to look. And if I were to outsource, I could explain very clearly to someone what I want and how I want those pictures to look. But regardless of whether you do decide to outsource or not, editing is something that you should learn. You should learn how to use Lightroom and Photoshop. Point number 7, determination and perseverance are way more important than raw talent or having an eye. You can improve your photography through time, through practice, through education. So having an eye is a great start. I'm not taking anything away from that, but practice and education can help you catch up very quickly with someone who has raw talent. There can only be one best photographer in the world. Somewhere out there is one person who is the best photographer in the world. So none of us can be that, except for that one person. So everyone else has to set up for not being the best photographer in the world, but trying to create their art and make a living from doing it. Point number 8, if you are serious about making a career in the photography world, you're going to need to learn about business. Now, I can imagine there's going to be people watching this video who just instantly want to turn it off, because some photographers just want to be artists, just want to create beautiful photos and don't want to be burdened with the business side of things. But a simple fact of life is that unless you have some kind of business acumen, you won't be able to make a career out of it. It's not to say that you need to understand advanced financial forecasting and balance sheets, although obviously it would be an advantage if you did, but you do need to have an idea of how to kind of market, advertise and run a business so that you don't get in trouble with the taxman, for example. You need to be able to keep your accounts, understand where your business is at, how to price your work and all of these kind of things. And this is one of the number one kind of ways I see people falling over in their objective or their goal of becoming a photographer, is not understanding the basics of business and pricing and marketing. So if there's one thing that you need to level up once you've got your photos to a certain standard and worked on your editing, it's the business side of things. Point number 9, photography is fun, but that doesn't mean that being a photographer is always fun and glamorous. There are days where it feels like that, but there's other days where you have a client who doesn't show up, you've actually got to take the bins out and paint the kitchen. That's what we're doing today. We've been painting the kitchen. When you're running your own business, you basically have to do everything. You know, when we opened this studio, we were laying carpets, we were laying laminate flooring, we were spending hours in the DIY shop buying all the things that we needed. There's a lot of like headaches involved in running any business, and photography is no different to that. Don't get me wrong, my job is fun, I love it, and occasionally it has little moments of glamour, but that is not the day-to-day kind of reality of it. More days than not, I do wake up raring to go and looking forward to working, but the reality of, you know, life is that sometimes we have a bad day and not every day is going to be amazing and fun and glamorous, but try and make sure at least a few of them are. And number 10. It's a bit of a broad one. In the world of photography, your opportunities are endless. There's so many avenues you can go down in the world of photography, whether that's being a wildlife photographer, a nature photographer, a landscape photographer. You can photograph people, you can become a boudoir photographer, you can do weddings, you can become a sports photographer. So you can incorporate whatever your passion is into what you end up doing for a living, and that's an amazing thing. And there's not a whole load of careers that's true of. There's so much freedom to becoming a photographer. That's all we've got today. That's 10 things that I wish I'd known. I wish someone had sat down and explained or talked to me about when I was kind of starting out as a photographer and planning where my career was going to go. I'm very fortunate to do what I do for a living, and hopefully some of these videos can help some of you do the same. Take care. Bye bye.